The night Cass Elliot died, her manager panicked. He called a reporter and begged her to print a lie. "Tell them she choked on a ham sandwich," he said. The reporter did, and for 50 years, the world believed it. But Cass didn't choke on anything. She died of heart failure at 32, alone, in a London flat she didn't own, after years of crash diets that slowly destroyed her from the inside out. And that lie? It wasn't the first one told about her. It wasn't even the worst. Her own bandmates wrote a lyric mocking her weight and sang it on national television. She was kept out of a group she helped build because the leader said she was too heavy to be seen. And when she finally starved her way onto the biggest solo stage of her career, her body shut down in front of Jimi Hendrix and Sammy Davis Jr. She never told anyone who fathered her only child. That secret stayed buried for decades. This is the story of Mama Cass, the one nobody ever told you. Drop where you're watching from and subscribe. Let's get into it. But before we get to the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the night everything ended, we need to go back to the beginning, because the tragedy of Mama Cass didn't start on a stage. It started in the body she was born into. Ellen Naomi Cohen came into the world on September 19, 1941, in Baltimore, Maryland. Her parents, Philip and Bess Cohen, were the children of Russian Jewish immigrants. All 4 grandparents had crossed the Atlantic with almost nothing, and that struggle didn't end with them. The family bounced between Baltimore and Alexandria, Virginia, chasing whatever money Philip could scrape together. Her mother, Bess, was a trained nurse who held the household together while Philip chased one business venture after another. Most of them failed. Eventually, he found something that worked. He outfitted retired city buses as mobile kitchens and drove them onto construction sites to feed workers. His daughter had a name for it: Meals on Wheels for Schlemiels. Even as a child, Cass was razor sharp. According to her sister, Leah Kunkel, their mother once said Cass had an IQ around 165. She could speak 5 languages before she turned 5, picking them up from the refugees her parents took in from Poland, Germany, Russia, and Italy. But brilliance didn't shield her from the one thing that would define how the world saw her. "I've been fat since I was 7, Cass said. "Being fat sets you apart. But luckily I was bright with it. I got into the habit of being independent, and the habit became a design for living." At Forest Park High School in Baltimore, Cass discovered theater. She wasn't just drawn to performing. She was consumed by it. In 1960, at 17, she took a dare and auditioned for a summer stock production of Times the Boy-Friend Times at the Owings Mills Playhouse. She won the role of the French maid and performed it with braces still on her teeth, footlights catching every smile. That was the moment. Everything after it was pursuit. She dropped out of high school just before graduation, ignored her parents' hopes for college, and moved to New York City to become an actress. This was 1961. Broadway wasn't kind to women who didn't fit the mold, and Cass knew she didn't fit. But she went anyway. In New York, she hustled hard. She toured with a production of Time's The Music Man. She directed a play at Café La Mama, an experimental theatre space in the East Village that was becoming a hub for avant-garde performance. She knocked on every door she could find, and then she got the kind of break that almost changes your life. In 1962, she auditioned for the role of Miss Marmelstein in the Broadway musical Time's I Can Get It For You Wholesale. It was a comedic part, perfect for her energy and timing. She wanted it badly. The role went to an unknown singer from Brooklyn named Barbra Streisand. That loss stung deep. Streisand would ride that single role into immediate stardom. Cass would watch it happen from the outside. In that audition room, they were equals, and Cass lost. Broadway, she decided, was a game she couldn't win. Not because she lacked talent, because the industry had already decided what a leading lady was supposed to look like. So she turned to music. Singing, she believed, might hurt less. She was wrong. And the people she was about to meet would prove it in the cruelest way possible. In 1962, Cass crossed paths with banjoist Tim Rose and singer John Brown near Washington, D.C. They started performing as the Triumvirate. In Omaha, they picked up folk guitarist James Hendricks. Brown dropped out. They reformed as the Big Three. They landed in Greenwich Village at the exact right moment. The early 1960s folk scene was electric. Bob Dylan was rewriting the rules. Coffee houses were packed. Woody Allen and Bill Cosby were doing stand-up in the same clubs where folk acts played between sets. The Big Three carved out a spot at the bitter end, one of the most famous venues in the village. They were tight, polished. And Cass, even in a trio where nobody was supposed to stand out, stood out. Her voice had weight, presence, something you couldn't teach. The exposure came fast. The Big Three landed spots on The Tonight Show, Hootenanny, and The Danny Kaye Show. 26 television appearances, 2 albums on FM records. It wasn't stardom, but Cass Elliot was finally being heard beyond the stage she was standing on. Then came a decision that had nothing to do with music. In 1963, Cass married James Hendricks not for love, but to keep him out of the Vietnam draft. The marriage was never consummated, a favor between bandmates, nothing more. But it tied Cass to a man she didn't love at the exact moment she was falling for someone she couldn't have. His name was Denny Doherty, a tenor from Nova Scotia with a voice that could melt glass. They met when Cass pulled together a new group called the Mugwumps Cass, Hendricks, Doherty, and guitarist Zal Yanovsky. John Sebastian drifted in and out on harmonica. They recorded 9 tracks for Warner Brothers in 2 days, released 1 single. After barely 5 months, the whole thing collapsed. But something had happened that Cass couldn't undo. She had fallen completely in love with Denny Doherty, the kind of love that rewires your decisions, the kind that makes you follow someone across state lines into situations you know will hurt you. When the Mugwumps split, Yanovsky and Sebastian formed the Lovin' Spoonful. Doherty joined the New Journeymen, led by songwriter John Phillips and his stunning wife, Michelle. Cass wasn't invited, but Denny was there. And wherever Denny went, Cass followed. Even when following meant being humiliated. What happened next would test every ounce of dignity she had left. The New Journeymen were John Phillips's vision. Tall, brooding, and razor-focused on how his music should sound, he wanted something clean, something that looked like Peter, Paul, and Mary. Michelle was the visual anchor, blonde, beautiful, effortlessly photogenic. Doherty brought the voice. Together they had potential. But Phillips knew they were missing something. He refused to admit who it was. Doherty knew. He'd sung with Cass in the Mugwumps. He'd heard what her contralto did when it wrapped around a harmony. He told Phillips repeatedly. Phillips wouldn't budge. Publicly, he claimed her voice was too low. But the real objection was uglier. He thought she was too heavy to stand next to Michelle. John didn't like my mother's look. Owen Elliott Kugel later wrote, he had a definite idea of what he wanted. When the New Journeymen travelled to the Virgin Islands in early 1965, Cass followed uninvited. She couldn't afford to rehearse all day, so she waitressed at a bar called Duffy's where the group performed. She served them beer, cleared their tables. After hours, she sang with them, fourth harmony. Unpaid, unwanted. According to Michelle Phillips, Cass was always there, waiting, watching, hoping. They let her rehearse but refused to let her perform. Humiliation served daily. Cass swallowed every bite because the alternative was walking away from Denny. But when the New Journeymen ran out of money and had nowhere to turn, they showed up at Cass's Los Angeles home, broke, desperate. And Cass held the cards for the first time. She offered them a roof with one condition. Let me in, or sleep on the street. John Phillips chose the pillow. That truth got buried beneath a better story that a copper pipe struck Cass on the head in the Virgin Islands and magically expanded her vocal range by 3 notes. She repeated the tale in a 1968 Rolling Stone interview. It's true. Honest to God. But friends later admitted it was a cover. The real reason Phillips kept her out. He thought she was too fat to be seen. Michelle Phillips confirmed she heard no difference in Cass's voice after the accident. Cass Elliot was finally in. What came next would make her famous while breaking her heart in ways the public would never understand. The 4 of them created what insiders called the 5th voice. A sound so layered it felt like something beyond any of them individually. It didn't just blend, it soared. California Dreamin', released December 1965, didn't catch fire immediately. Los Angeles radio ignored it, but a station in Boston picked it up, and from there it spread across the country. By March 1966, it sat at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed on the chart for 17 weeks. Their debut album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, hit number 1 on the Billboard 200. Then came Monday. John Phillips had written it in 20 minutes. When he first played it for the group, Cass and Michelle called it pretentious, the worst song they'd ever heard. They were wrong. It became the group's only number 1 hit 3 weeks at the top, 160,000 copies on day 1, a Grammy in 1967. In less than a year, they'd gone from broke drifters to one of the biggest acts in America. 40 million records worldwide. Ed Sullivan Show appearances. They headlined the Monterey Pop Festival in June 1967, alongside Hendrix and Joplin. Rolling Stone called Cass the Queen of L.A. Pop Society. Crosby, Stills, and Nash first sang together in her Laurel Canyon kitchen. New York Magazine wrote, "She is a star, not despite her weight or because of it, but beyond it. Cass is a horizon." But fame amplified the cruelty. In 1967, the band released Creek Alley, buried in the lyrics. "No one's getting fat, except Mama Cass." Her own bandmates wrote it, performed it on national television. Audiences sang it back, laughing, not realizing they were repeating a joke built on years of private humiliation. That lyric cemented a nickname she despised. Not Cass Elliot, the singer, Mama Cass, the heavy girl in the band. "I never created the Big Mama image," she said. "The public does it for you." And while the public reduced her to her weight, the man she'd followed into the band was about to deliver a betrayal that would break something inside her that never fully healed. Denny Doherty didn't just reject Cass. He chose the one woman she could never compete with. And he did it under her nose. The affair with Michelle Phillips started in late 1965, right as the band was recording their debut. Michelle later told Vanity Fair, "There'd be so much sexual energy between Denny and me that we'd be playing footsie under the table, and Cass and John didn't notice it. But secrets don't survive long in a band that lives, records, and travels together." When the truth came out, it detonated the group from the inside. John Phillips channeled his rage into a song. "I Saw Her Again" climbed to number 5 on the Hot 100. The country sang along to a man's pain about his wife's infidelity. They didn't know the other man was sitting right next to him on stage. John's heartbreak was public. Cass's was private. And hers cut deeper. She had joined this band for Denny, followed him across state lines, waitressed at his feet, endured years of rejection. And now she discovered the man she loved had been sleeping with the woman she already felt overshadowed by. The slim, blonde, impossibly beautiful Michelle Phillips. The woman Cass had spent her whole life being compared to without ever being asked if the comparison was fair. When Cass finally confronted Michelle, the words she chose said everything. "You can have any man in the world, Why take the one man I love? The mess deepened. Michelle started seeing Jean Clark of the Birds, flaunting it openly. John fired her on her birthday, June 4th, 1966. She was replaced by Jill Gibson. By August, Michelle was back. The replacement hadn't worked. Doherty summed up the chaos in a 2001 Globe and Mail interview. Cass wanted me. I wanted Michelle. John wanted Michelle. Michelle wanted me. She wanted her freedom. In the end, no one has what they want, and everyone heads for home. But Cass didn't head for home. She stayed. She kept singing. And after the band broke up, she did something that shocked even those closest to her. She proposed to Denny Doherty. He turned her down. Years later, he admitted why. She weighed 300 pounds, and I wasn't enough of a man to get past that. That one sentence explains the entire tragedy of Cass Elliot's romantic life. Rejected because of a number on a scale. And still, she refused to stop. Even as everything around her was unraveling, the unraveling crept in through the people Cass surrounded herself with and the substances she used to numb the pain. By 1967, the Mamas and the Papas were one of the biggest acts on the planet. But behind the harmonies, the lifestyle was consuming them. Doherty told the New York Times the first thing he did every morning and the last thing he did every night was have a blast of rum. Michelle admitted they never entered the studio without a case of Crown Royal and a bag of pot. One blunt summary of the band's trajectory put it perfectly. Before they hit big, the group dropped acid, smoked, and drank. After they hit big, they did exactly the same, just with more money and fewer limits. David Crosby, in his 1988 memoir, admitted he used opiates and cocaine with Cass. But what made her situation dangerous weren't just the substances, it was the men who supplied them. One name kept surfacing. Pick Dawson, Harry Pickens Dawson, her occasional boyfriend and, according to multiple sources, an international drug trafficker, a fixture in the Hollywood party scene, with deep underworld connections. British authorities had been tracking him for months. And when the Mamas and the Papas arrived at Southampton in October 1967 for a scheduled show at the Royal Albert Hall, 6 Metropolitan Police officers were waiting at the dock. They weren't there for bedsheets. Officially, Cass was arrested for stealing 2 blankets and a hotel key worth about £10 from a London hotel. She was bundled into a police car, driven to Scotland Yard, strip-searched, denied bail, and held overnight. But according to Michelle, police barely asked about linens. Their real interest was Dawson. Cass was leverage. The charges collapsed the next day at West London Magistrates' Court. No evidence. But the negative press forced the band to cancel their entire British concert run. When Cass later returned to perform at the Palladium, she addressed the audience with a grin. I liked 'em, so I took 'em. But the laughter masked something darker. Cass's Hollywood home had become a legendary gathering place. Musicians, actors, producers, everyone came through, but so did people who shouldn't have been anywhere near a celebrity's living room. According to actor Michael Caine, Cass once introduced him to a scruffy little man at a Hollywood party that also included Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring. That man was Charles Manson. 2 of Cass's ex-boyfriends, Pick Dawson and another dealer named Billy Doyle, were reportedly ejected from a party at Roman Polanski's house shortly before the Tate murders in August 1969. After the killings, John Phillips blamed Cass. John blamed me for bringing killers into our group, she said. Blamed me for Sharon's death, and said police were going to arrest me as an accomplice. Authorities never supported those claims. But the association clung to her. By 1968, the band was fractured beyond repair. Cass was ready to bet everything on herself. She believed something better was waiting on the other side. She was about to learn how cruel the other side could be. On April 26, 1967, Cass gave birth to a daughter she named Owen Vanessa. She named me Owen because I was her own, her daughter later explained. Motherhood changed everything. She told Rolling Stone, "Having the baby changed my life a lot. I didn't want to go on the road. I wanted to stay home with my baby." But staying home wasn't an option for a woman who still had something to prove. By July 1968, the band was officially done. The love triangle had poisoned them. The drugs had worn them out. And Cass had already signaled her exit with the song that would define her solo career. Dream a Little Dream of Me, released in June 1968, climbed to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, hit number 11 in the UK, and reached number 1 in Australia. It was dreamy, intimate, and unmistakably hers. For the first time, Cass wasn't sharing the spotlight. She owned it. Riding that momentum, she landed what looked like her coronation, a 3-week headlining residency at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, $40,000 a week. 2 shows a night, the Circus Maximus Theatre. This was supposed to be the moment that proved Cass Elliot didn't need the band, but the pressure to look the part nearly killed her before she reached the stage. In the 6 months before opening night, she crash-dieted 100 pounds off her 300-pound frame. The weight dropped fast. So did her health: stomach ulcer, failing throat. She treated the symptoms with milk and cream, regaining 50 pounds. For 3 weeks before the show, she was confined to bed while the production team assembled the show without her. She managed one partial rehearsal before her voice gave out completely. On the evening of October 16, 1968, 950 people filled the Circus Maximus: Sammy Davis, Junior Jimi Hendrix, Peter Lawford, Joan Baez, Liza Minnelli, Mia Farrow. Backstage, Cass was burning with fever. Friends begged her manager to cancel. She refused. She fell apart in real time. Voice weak, barely audible. At the end, she returned to the mic. "This is the first night, and it will get better." The second show was worse. Audience members walked out. Caesars Palace cancelled after one night. Newsweek compared her to the Titanic, writing that she slid down the waves and sank to the bottom. Esquire called it a disaster heroic in proportion, epic in scope. According to biographer Eddie Fiegel, Cass later admitted she had injected heroin before going on stage. She spiraled into depression. But Cass Elliot was not the kind of woman who stayed down. Over the next several years, she rebuilt. Slowly, painfully. She appeared on television, constantly guest hosting The Tonight Show, appearing on The Johnny Cash Show, The Carol Burnett Show, The Andy Williams Show, and Hollywood Squares. She hosted 2 of her own variety specials, the Mama Cass television program on ABC in 1969 and Don't Call Me Mama Anymore on CBS in 1973. That second title said everything about where her head was. She was done being anyone's punchline. In 1973, she hired Alan Carr as her new manager. He steered her away from pop and into the cabaret circuit. She premiered a brand new act at the Flamingo in Las Vegas, the same city that had humiliated her 5 years earlier. This time, she received rave reviews. The Las Vegas Sun wrote, "Cass Elliot, making a strong point that she is no longer Mama Cass, has a good act serving notice that she is here to stay. The audience was with her all the way. No empty seats anywhere." From there, she headlined the Riviera, the Fairmont in San Francisco, and swanky clubs in Miami and Puerto Rico. The city of Baltimore even dedicated August 15, 1973, as Cass Elliot Day in her honor. She had solo hits too. Make Your Own Kind of Music reached the top 40 inches, 1969, and would find massive new life decades later on television shows like Lost and Dexter, and eventually went viral on TikTok. But the one thing she wanted most real, lasting love, kept slipping away. In 1971, Cass married Donald von Wiedenmann, a journalist and heir to a Bavarian barony. She had met him in London 2 years earlier. According to biographer Fiegel, he was the only man she dated who never talked about her size. It didn't matter. The marriage collapsed in months. As a mother, Cass was fiercely protective, firing nannies who grew too close, shielding Owen from press, refusing to reveal the father's identity. She was responsible for 100% of my welfare, Owen later said, but her body was breaking. On April 22, 1974, she collapsed backstage at The Tonight Show, treated and released. She told everyone it was exhaustion. On May 7, she returned to Carson's show and joked about it on camera. Self-deprecating humor. A laugh to cover the crack. She didn't slow down. She flew to London for a 2-week residency at the Palladium. And she was magnificent. Sell-out crowds. Standing ovations every night. On the last night, Saturday, July 27, she saw a photograph of Judy Garland backstage, inscribed with Garland's performance dates. Cass paused and said, "I know what it must have meant to that lady to be a hit here, because I know what it means to me." Cass paused and said, Cass paused. She called Michelle Phillips and wept into the phone. Happy tears. She had done it. Then everything collapsed in 48 hours. Mick Jagger's 31st birthday party on Tite Street in Chelsea. She didn't drink. A brunch hosted by Georgia Brown, where guests noticed her coughing, blowing her nose, struggling to breathe. A final cocktail party hosted by Jack Martin. She was usually the heartbeat of any room. Not this time. She blamed exhaustion. Hadn't slept since Jagger's party. Decided to go home. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. She returned to flat 12, 9 Curzon Place in Mayfair, Harry Nilsson's apartment. She wrote a letter to her 7-year-old daughter. Then she went to bed. On July 29, her secretary, Dot MacLeod, opened the bedroom door. Cass Elliot was dead. She was 32 years old. Forensic pathologist Keith Simpson found no drugs in her system, no alcohol. What he found was devastating. A full third of her heart muscle had degenerated, fatty myocardial degeneration caused by years of extreme yo-yo dieting. Her heart had simply grown too weak to beat. A ham sandwich sat on the bedside table, untouched. But before the autopsy, the first doctor on scene, Dr. Anthony Greenberg, told press she may have choked while eating in bed. He was wrong. The sandwich hadn't been touched. But by the time the truth came out weeks later, the myth had taken root. In 2020, journalist Sue Cameron publicly admitted she planted the story at manager Alan Carr's request. He'd called her crying from the flat. "There's a half-eaten ham sandwich on the nightstand," he said. He begged her to print it. His logic was twisted but deliberate. A choking story was less damaging than drug speculation. Cameron printed it. Carr thanked her. One of the greatest voices of the 1960s. Reduced to a fat joke that chased her past the grave for 50 years. "It's been hard for my family," Owen told People. "One last slap against the fat lady. What's so darn funny?" The apartment held one more dark chapter. 4 years later, on the 7th of September 1978, Keith Moon of The Who died in the same flat. Same bedroom, same bed. Also 32 years old. Moon overdosed on prescription sedatives meant to treat his alcoholism. Nilsson, devastated by 2 deaths in his home, sold the flat to Pete Townshend and never returned to London. After Cass's death, 7-year-old Owen went to live with her aunt, Leah Kunkel, Cass's younger sister, who was married to session drummer Russ Kunkel. Leah raised Owen alongside her own son, Nathaniel. Owen grew up not knowing her father's identity. Cass had guarded that secret so fiercely that even her closest friends couldn't answer the question. Then, on the night of Owen's 19th birthday, the truth came out. Her mother's former bandmates revealed the name Chuck Day, a session bassist and guitarist from Chicago who had played on Monday, and California Dreamin'. Cass had known him, chosen him deliberately, and kept his identity locked away. Michelle Phillips took it further. She had her assistant place an ad in Musician magazine, baited with the promise of unclaimed royalties. A friend of Day's saw the ad and called. First words, "Is this about the kid?" Michelle bought Owen a plane ticket to San Francisco. The second I saw him, I knew we shared DNA, Owen told People in 2024. He was a perfect stranger, telling me how much he loved me. The weirdest thing I've ever heard in my whole life. Chuck Day died the 10th of March, 2008, at 65. He'd attended Cass's funeral in 1974 but sat in the back and never introduced himself. His paternity wasn't publicly revealed until after his death. In 1998, the Mamas and the Papas entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Owen stood on stage in her mother's place. On the 3rd of October 2022, Cass received her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame number 2735 at 7065 Hollywood Boulevard. Owen led the campaign. In 2024, she published her memoir, My Mama, Cass, telling her mother's story on her own terms. Cass was cremated. Her ashes buried at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in Los Angeles. Denny Doherty died the 19th of January 2007 in Toronto at 66. Before he passed, he said something that cut through every myth ever told about her. Cassie literally died of a broken heart. She forced her way into a band that didn't want her, sang circles around everyone who doubted her, mothered a child she shielded from the world, and died at 32 inches, a flat that would claim another legend in the same bed 4 years later. She deserved better than a sandwich myth. She deserved to be remembered for what she was, one of the greatest voices of her generation, a woman who made her own kind of music, even when the world told her she didn't belong on the stage. If this story moved you, drop your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and share this with someone who needs to hear the real story of Mama Cass. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.